Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. The first item of business is general questions, and at question number 1 I call Lorna Slater.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to report that Edinburgh City Council plan to displace up to 700 residents living in unlicensed temporary accommodation this winter without suitable alternative accommodation available.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Anne Somerville.
Everyone has the right to a safe and suitable home. The Minister for Housing and I met twice with the leader of City of Edinburgh Council and the housing convener and have pledged to work with the Council on its plans to resolve this problem. Scottish Government officials are meeting daily with council officers. All options are urgently being explored to ensure that affected residents are fully supported and, where necessary, rehoused safely.
Lorna Slater.
The situation in Edinburgh shows the overwhelming need for an urgent human rights-based response from ministers and local authorities to the housing emergency. There must be no dilution of existing legal protections for people experiencing homelessness. Will the Cabinet Secretary work with the local authority, local stakeholders and public bodies who may have suitable accommodation to find a pragmatic solution that ensures that nobody ends up on the streets after the 30th of November?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Minister for Housing and I were pleased to meet with Lorna Slater and representatives of charities working in Edinburgh yesterday to outline urgent steps that we're taking alongside the Council to find a solution. I said at that meeting, and I'm happy to confirm again today, Presiding Officer, that we are looking at all options that the Scottish Government could undertake, and we will do so in conjunction with stakeholders so that we ensure ourselves we are aware of the consequences of any proposed change and base our solutions, proposed solutions, on data and on evidence. And I once again give that commitment to Lorna Slater today and indeed to those that were at the meeting we were both at yesterday.
Ben Macpherson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the answers that she's already given and the collaborative approach that's being taken with City of Edinburgh Council in this very worrying situation. The situation that has emerged is, of course, partly a product of the housing emergency and it being most acute here in the capital. Therefore, can the Cabinet Secretary set out what additional support and specific support the Scottish Government is providing City of Edinburgh Council, including what share of the £40 million acquisition fund is being allocated?
Cabinet Secretary.
So the £40 million acquisition fund was in the main targeted to local authorities with the most pressures, and that meant that Edinburgh will receive just over £14 million as part of that £40 million allocation, and they can use that for both acquisitions and to bring void properties back into use. The void properties obviously being something which is usually the responsibility solely of the Council, but the Government has stepped in with further flexibility on that. This takes the total available available investment in affordable housing in the city this year to over £49 million.
Question number 2, Martin Whitfield.
Very grateful, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it's taking to reduce waiting time for dental extractions in rural NHS board areas.
Minister Jenny Minto.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Any long wait for surgery is highly regrettable. However, it is important to note that the overwhelming majority of NHS dental care is delivered in a primary setting. We are working with health boards to develop detailed annual delivery plans to support waiting list reductions and improve productivity. We continue to target resources to ensure people waiting the longest are treated as soon as possible.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm grateful as the Minister for that response, but Freedom of Information results from NHS health boards reveal the failure to deliver adequate dental care across Scotland. NHS Dumfries and Galloway, children wait an average of 42 weeks. NHS Ayrshire and Arran, 20 weeks. And NHS Lothian has seen waiting times rise by nearly 300% since 2019. The NHS is an emanation of the state. The UNCRC Article 24 is clear and gives the right of every child to the highest attainable standard of health and access to essential care. What is the Scottish Government's defence to the failure to live up to that human right?
Minister.
I thank Martin Whitfield for his question and recognise the waiting lists are far too long for young children. I have visited the dental hospital in Glasgow to see what work that they are doing to improve throughput and the work that they are doing with health boards. I also met with the BDA Scotland last week and listened to their concerns as well. As I noted in my first answer, we expect health boards to deliver annual delivery plans to clearly set out how they will access long waits across all specialities, including paediatric dentistry.
Question number 3, Willie Coffey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on how it can make communities safer from the use and the impact of fireworks.
Minister Siobhan Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We've introduced a number of measures to limit unsafe and antisocial use of fireworks, including restrictions on supply and giving powers to local authorities to designate firework control zones. Like the police and partners, we are keen to explore further opportunities for addressing and preventing disorder of the kinds that we have seen in some places. I've written to the UK Government asking for a meeting to discuss what more can be done on fireworks regulations. We will continue to engage with the UK Government to gauge opportunities to improve fireworks regulation.
Coffey.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? She will be acutely aware of the traumatic impact that the noise from fireworks can have on family pets and wildlife in general, with more examples each year of animals actually dying with fright from the noise, and not forgetting also people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder too. Would the Government consider what more it could do to persuade people to opt for silent or low noise fireworks? They're readily available, just as spectacular in terms of their visual displays, but they don't cause any traumatic effects to our household pets and wildlife and those other citizens that I've mentioned.
Minister.
Thank you. I agree that fireworks should always be used responsibly, and particularly considering the noise impact. I've noted with interest that there is a private member's bill in the House of Commons mandating the use of silent or low noise fireworks. The legal maximum noise level for fireworks is defined within the UK-wide legislation, and I have written, as I said, to the UK Government to request a meeting to discuss updating firework regulation, and I recognise that we share the goal of enhancing community safety and well-being, and I plan to address the noise issues as part of these conversations.
Question number 4, Ross Greer.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with East Dunbartonshire Council regarding the condition of Milngavie Primary School.
Cabinet Secretary Jenny Gilruth.
Scottish Government officials continue to be in close contact with the East Dunbartonshire Council regarding the condition of Milngavie Primary School. The Council have advised that they have had a number of site meetings at the school with the parent council, councillors and MSPs. They have stated that these meetings were positive and helped the Council to demonstrate that work has been completed to date. Further remedial work is planned, and the Council has assured us that they will continue to engage with the parent council and school community as it progresses.
Ross Greer.
Thank you, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Milngavie Primary School is a Victorian-era building in poor condition, and East Dunbartonshire Council had a plan for a full and thorough refurbishment that should have begun by now. That plan had to be put on hold as a knock-on effect of the previous UK Government's decision to cut Scotland's capital budget by 20%. The immediate urgent remedial work that has taken place has resolved some of the most acute issues, but a thorough refurbishment of the building is clearly required. This is the consensus of all political parties and all elected representatives in East Dunbartonshire. So I'd like to ask the Cabinet Secretary if she would be willing to visit the school with me, and if, given the slight relief to Scotland's capital settlement as a result of the most recent UK budget announcement, if the Government would consider an increase to the Learning Estate Improvement Programme to allow both Milngavie Primary but also the other schools in East Dunbartonshire that require refurbishment or a full rebuild to proceed.
Cabinet Secretary.
So I thank the member for his interest in this matter. I know he's written to me directly on it, and I'm happy to confirm on the record today that I will visit the school with him and ask officials to continue their engagements with East Dunbartonshire Council. I think it is worthwhile putting on the record, though, that the funding announced in the UK Government's autumn statement was broadly in line with our planning assumptions. However, we will, of course, continue to carefully look at the context of education consequentials. The member will know that, of course, the reason the new UK Government have had to be forced essentially to prioritise investment in school buildings is as a legacy of the Conservative Government previously starving investment in school buildings in England. That is not the case, of course, in Scotland, where we have prioritised investment in our school estate, which have shown in the latest statistics that over 91% of our buildings are now in good or satisfactory condition. And of course, East Dunbartonshire Council have benefited additionally from £10.2 million towards schools in their area through the previous Schools for the Future programme, and they are benefiting through the LEAP programme. But I'm happy to continue to work with the member on this issue, and I recognise the strength of feeling locally too, and officials will continue to engage with the local authority.
Pam Gossel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Worried parents have written to me, including the President of the Parent Council, expressing distress over the state of Milngavie Primary School. I visited the school premise last month, and it was clear that more substantial work needs to be done. I've also received correspondence from parents at Westerton Primary School in Bearsden who said that the school's building is in dire need of repair. Therefore, I would like to ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to ensure that children's safety in schools is a #1 priority.
Secretary.
Well, I think, again, worthwhile reminding the member that the school estate does not belong to Scottish Government. It is an estate that is owned by local authorities. So the responsibility for the school estate rests with the local authority. I very much hear the strength of feeling from the member that has also been reflected today by Ross Greer. I hope she hears my continued commitment to engage with the local authority on this. And of course, the Government has provided significant additional investment to improve the quality of our school estate, from approximately 61% being in good or satisfactory condition back in 2007 to over 91% today. That has only happened as a direct result of investment from this Government. I hope the member recognises that, and I commit again to work directly with the local authority on helping to drive the improvements in the primary school named.
Question number 5, Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the number of people who are not aware of a Do Not Resuscitate order being placed on their medical notes, including in relation to next of kin and power of attorney holders.
Cabinet Secretary Neil Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government does not centrally collect information or data relating to the number or use of Do Not Attempt Cardiovascular Resuscitation DNA CPR forms. As with all other clinical treatments, decisions about CPR should be based on the individual clinical circumstances and wishes of the patient and recorded appropriately. This is done in hard copy on a DNA CPR form, the existence of which is then recorded on an individual's key information summary. Such information is only shared for the purposes of direct care and is therefore not centrally collected.
Miles Briggs.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer and acknowledge the fact the Scottish Government are not collecting this information. There have been serious concerns raised, especially during the pandemic, with regards to the use of DNR, also known as Do Not Attempt Resuscitation orders, and wondered where the Scottish Government actually are looking at changing that process, and what investigation have ministers actually undertook to assess how many patients may still not be aware that they have a DNR order placed on their medical notes, and will the Cabinet Secretary look to review this and the collection of this data by the Scottish Government?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Miles Briggs for raising an issue which is obviously incredibly sensitive, and I recognise the strength of feeling that there will be for patients and for those that Miles Briggs seeks to represent today. In 2016, the DNA CPR policy was reviewed to reflect feedback and changes in the UK-wide National Good Practice guidance from the British Medical Association, the Royal College of Nursing and the Resuscitation Council UK. Legal changes resulting from case law and specialist legal advice was provided as part of the formation of the policy, and the Scottish Government continually reviews best practice and advice relating to resuscitation. We are undertaking work to improve our electronic recording systems to allow us to provide more clarity on care planning at a local and national level, and recognising the sensitivity here, if there is further discussion that would be helpful for Miles Briggs in a more private space, I'd be happy to facilitate that.
Question number 6, Lorna Whittam.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on what action it is taking to improve access to audiology services.
Minister Jenny Minto.
Thank you. Audiology is being considered as a clinical priority area, and improvement work is now being progressed through the National Planning and Delivery Board arrangements led by the Chief Operating Officer NHS Scotland. I wrote to the Health and Social Care and Sport Committee on the 23rd of September to outline this work, and committed to writing to the committee again in January 2025 with a further update of progress.
Lorna Whittam.
I thank the Minister for her answer. The Minister will know that it is cost effective to provide hearing loss services for adults in the community rather than in hospitals, and that primary care and high street audiologists are expert clinicians who can improve access to care in communities throughout Scotland, timely addressing hearing loss at the right time to reduce associated loneliness and isolation. Does the Minister agree with me that we could benefit from approaching hearing loss in Scotland the same way we approach eye tests in the community? As per Specsavers' recent report, it's time to talk about hearing, to improve patient experience and relieve pressures on valuable NHS resources.
Minister.
I thank Lorna Whittam for her question and recognise, as I have visited a glaucoma service on the High Street, the benefit that that has given to patients, as Lorna Whittam outlined. We remain committed to our vision for an integrated community-based hearing service in Scotland. In considering the future direction for the sector, it's right we move forward in step with the work of the independent review on audiology. This, together with the wider financial and strategic context in which we are currently operating, has necessitated the rephasing of our commitment on community hearing. However, we are continuing to work with NHS third sector and private providers to identify appropriate models for community care for any future service reform, ensuring those with lived experience inform this work.
Brief supplementary, Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. People in the south of Scotland are continuing to report to me they are being left to navigate a very bureaucratic maze just to get proper diagnosis. That's a year after NHS audiology services were highlighted as having a multiple systemic problem by an independent review. So can the Minister commit to some urgency around dealing with this bureaucratic maze?
Minister.
I thank Carol Mockin for her question and recognise the urgency that is required, which is why I'm very pleased that the Chief Operating Officer of NHS Scotland is leading this work with the Task and Finish group, and I get very regular updates on progress, as do members of the group and third sector organisations.
Question number 7, James Dornan.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the annual performance of Social Security Scotland in 2023-24.
Cabinet Secretary.
Social Security Scotland published their annual reports and accounts, and the Charter Measurement Framework results this week. Findings show 90% of respondents say their overall experience was very good or good. And in the last financial year, we paid over £1.9 billion to people across Scotland. During that time, we have launched carer support payment nationally and a pilot of pension age disability payment. We now deliver 15 benefits, 7 of which are only available in Scotland.
James Dornan.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. And of the £1.9 billion issued in devolved social security payments across Scotland, over £277 million was invested in Glasgow, including to my Glasgow Cathcart constituents. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline for Glasgow and for Scotland as a whole how much of Social Security Scotland's investment went to devolved benefits unique to Scotland, not available anywhere else in the UK, such as the transformative Scottish Child Payment?
Cabinet Secretary.
In 2023-24, Social Security Scotland invested £500 million in benefits unique to Scotland. Of this, £80 million was invested in the Glasgow City area. Our investment will support 1.4 million people this year, around 1 in 4 people in Scotland. And Social Security Scotland's benefits are helping keeping children out of poverty, assisting people to deal with the rising living costs, as well as supporting disabled people and carers who devote their time to care for others.
To number 8, Mark Ruskell.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary in Scotland's latest report on road policing.
Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance.
Presiding Officer, my thoughts are with all of those who have been affected by road death, and I am grateful to HMICS for producing the report, and while it is for the Chief Constable to determine how to allocate her resources, I welcome confirmation that the service is already taking action to address the issues raised, including the identification and implementation of a sustainable model for road policing.
Mark Ruskell.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? It's quite clear that speed kills and that communities across Scotland are fed up with dangerous speeding which goes undetected, unenforced and unpunished by the police and the courts. This is a rural problem, but it's also an urban problem. So does the Cabinet Secretary believe that it's time to devolve responsibility for speed enforcement to councils, allowing communities to control dangerous speeding and creating a much-needed source of revenue to invest in safer streets?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, in terms of investment, I would like to assure the member that road safety indeed is a priority for the Scottish Government and indeed Police Scotland, which is why we are investing a record £36 million this year to deliver initiatives aimed at improving driver behaviour and ultimately to help reduce the number of casualties on our road. The member may also be aware of the new digital evidence sharing capability system, which will enable members of the public to upload footage from mobile devices or from computers, making it easier to share evidence, allowing swifter access to justice and helping cases to be resolved more quickly.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. At question number 1, I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Auditor-General's latest report on SNP government spending and public services is absolutely scathing. He lays bare the risks facing critical frontline services because of this government's lack of transparency. He says they have, and I quote, not been sufficiently transparent with the Scottish Parliament or the public about the current fiscal situation. So why is John Swinney's government so addicted to secrecy and so disrespectful towards the paying public?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, there's 2 points I'd make in response to Mr Finlay's question. The first is on the question of fiscal sustainability. The Government has balanced the budget for every single one of the 17 years it has been in power, and as a consequence has lived within our means on every occasion we have had a budget to balance. And the second point I would make in relation to the question of transparency around financial challenges facing the Parliament. I don't think anyone listening to anything that ministers have said over the course of the last 14 years could have in any way escaped the setting out of the reality that the fiscal constraint of the austerity of the Conservatives has put unbearable burdens on our public finances, and this Government has delivered against that formidably difficult climate.
Russell Finlay.
Just the usual SNP whataboutery. Now, this is not the first independent investigation into SNP finances, and I'm quite sure it will not be the last. The Auditor-General says the Scottish Government does not know what savings will result from reform or what reform efforts will cost. I'll put that into layman's terms, Presiding Officer. This chaotic government doesn't have a clue. They don't know how much their plans will cost or even how much money they might save. So here's a chance for John Swinney to be more transparent. Does he have any idea at all, how much his proposed reforms will save taxpayers?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Government, as I said in my first answer, has lived within the resources that are available to us. We have balanced the budget. Is that not evidence enough for Mr Finlay that this Government is able to manage the public finances whenever we have the opportunity to do so? And what I'd say to Mr Finlay is the Government will set out a budget to Parliament on the 4th of December, which will be the accumulation of the choices that we have made about how we invest in our public services and what we ask people to pay to support those public services. That is the honest conversation this Government has with the people of Scotland. That's what we've done in the past, and that's what we'll do again on the 4th of December.
Yeah. Russell Finlay.
John Swinney, he doesn't seem to have a clue. I would commend him to read this report. He clearly hasn't read it. The Auditor-General says this Government has broken a commitment to deliver savings. He says, and I'm going to quote extensively from the Auditor-General, if John Swinney would like to listen, he says there's no clear vision for improving public services. He says the impact on the public is not even considered or monitored. He says the Government is not providing effective leadership. So under the SNP, there's no leadership, no transparency, no answers, just broken promises, pathetic excuses and making it up as they go along. This is what a John Swinney government really looks like, doesn't it?
First Minister.
I think Russell Finlay might be in a slightly stronger position to argue for his case if he
Excuse me, First Minister. I would ask members to refrain from interrupting those who have been called to speak. First Minister.
I think, Presiding Officer, Mr Finlay might be in a slightly stronger position to provide analytical support to Parliament if he hadn't been the person that argued that I should follow the example of Liz Truss. Because if I'd followed the example of Liz Truss, we would have acute problems in the balancing of our budget this year, because Liz Truss and her loyal Scottish ally Russell Finlay would have taken us to the economic and fiscal disaster that she inflicted on the United Kingdom. And all I can say is thank goodness I never inflicted that on Scotland.
Russell Finlay.
Dear me, it's not my party that's under investigation for financial fraud and is this week sacking half its staff, for goodness sakes. John Swinney will leave public services even worse off and waste taxpayers' money on a grand scale. The Auditor-General states it plainly. The Scottish Government cannot afford its current spending choices. Auditor-General reports are like Groundhog Day, the same problems laid bare year after year after year, but the SNP never ever learning from their mistakes. Instead, the SNP get broken SNP promises and broken public services. SNP ministers casually wasting public money with absolutely no regard for hard-working taxpayers. And doesn't this latest report prove once and for all that John Swinney and the SNP cannot be trusted with our public finances?
First Minister.
These issues, of course, will be considered as part of the parliamentary consideration of the budget, which will come after the 4th of December when the Finance Secretary sets out our proposals to Parliament. And during the week, I got a letter from Mr Finlay setting out the financial propositions of the Conservative Party. And on one side, Mr Finlay argued for a tax cut which would cost, in his estimation, not mine, his estimation, £1 billion, £1,000 million. And on the other side, Mr Finlay gave me a paragraph of the savings that will be delivered to achieve his £1,000 million tax cut. And those savings amount to the grand total of £53.74 million. So there's a a £950 million gaping hole in Mr Finlay's arguments to me this week. Don't dare come here and lecture me about the public finances with the ineptitude that you've put forward in your letter to me this week.
Let's ensure that we are always speaking through the chair. We go to question number 2, and I call Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today we will debate emergency legislation on early prisoner release. If the SNP government gets its way, hundreds of prisoners could be released before finishing less than half of their sentences from Scotland's prisons. In England and Wales, our Labour government is being forced to clear up the mess left by 14 years of the Tories. In Scotland, whose mess are John Swinney and the SNP clearing up?
Officer, the government is wrestling with a situation that's affecting many jurisdictions around the world, including the rest of the United Kingdom, where we have seen in the aftermath of COVID a sharp increase in the prison population as a consequence of the work to address the delays in the court and tribunal system. The government has brought forward legislation to address these issues and to ensure that we have in place a set of mechanisms that will ensure our prisons are safe for those who are working in prisons, safe in the public interest. And that's the proposals that Parliament will consider.
Anna Sarwar.
I asked whose mess the SNP were clearing up. They were clearing up their own mess over the last 17 years. And the fact of the matter is, in Scotland, the justice system has been independent forever, and the SNP have been charged with it for 17 years. And again, the fact is that this emergency legislation is a desperate attempt to tackle the symptoms of a crisis created by the SNP. On John Swinney's watch, we have Scotland's prisons at breaking point, our prison estate crumbling, soaring levels of remand, deep cuts to legal aid, a staffing crisis in our courts and huge court backlogs. And warning after warning has been ignored from the Chief Inspector of the Prisons, COSLA, Community Justice Scotland, Victim Support Scotland and the Scottish Prison Service. So why does John Swinney think that after 17 years of failure, the answer is to give more power through emergency legislation to this incompetent SNP government that has failed to manage and reform our criminal justice system?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, on the question of investment and reform in our criminal justice system, let me just give Mr Sarwar some facts. We've increased investment in justice through a 10% increase in the Prison Services resource budget for this year alone. So that's in relation to prisons. In relation to community justice, which was one of the other issues that Mr Sarwar raised with me, we expanded the investment in community justice this year by £14 million to a total of £148 million to further strengthen the alternatives to custody, which is exactly the direction of travel that I think Mr Sarwar is trying to suggest to me we should pursue. In addition to that, we've increased the use of electronically monitored bail, which is one of the key issues in relation to remand. And then also, as a consequence of the reforms that we brought forward in the Children, Care and Justice Scotland Act, we've been able to free up accommodation in HMP and the Young Offenders Institution at Pullman to accommodate more prisoners. So the government is taking the reform action that is required to address a situation that is affecting all jurisdictions that are addressing the post-COVID pandemic increase in the number of prisoners that are emerging. And there are steps being taken, which Parliament has had discussions about the approaches to the advice in relation to the pursuit of remand, which the Lord Advocate has set out to Parliament, which is just one of a number of interventions to address the significant issue that Mr Sarwar raises with me.
Anna Sarwar.
Officer, to be frank, the First Minister has his head in the sand. And just this morning, the Auditor General said the Scottish Government is not providing effective leadership on reform, and they are reacting to events rather than making fundamental changes. And he also warned that they are keeping the public in the dark about the scale of the crisis in our public services. But despite this, just 2 weeks ago, John Swinney said there was no need for a change in direction. But after 17 years of this SNP government, every institution is weaker. Our NHS is in crisis, with 1 in 6 Scots on a waiting list. Our education system is in crisis, with standards falling. Our housing system is in crisis, with 10,000 children living in temporary accommodation. Our justice system is in crisis, with victims being failed. So the need for reform and a new direction has never been clearer. So why is it that John Swinney and the SNP only have to offer more excuses, focusing on inputs, more incompetence, more waste and managed decline?
First Minister.
As ever, Mr Sarwar skates past some of the evidence on all of this. So let's take housing, for example. Mr Sarwar knows full well that this government's record on affordable housing is that we have built more affordable houses per head of population than any other part of the United Kingdom in recent years in the face of the unbridled austerity of the Conservatives. We have seen increases in activity in the National Health Service, in both operations and in the number of day cases being undertaken to erode the waiting lists that have accumulated as a consequence of COVID. Now, of course, there are challenges in the public finances. I have rehearsed to Parliament on almost every occasion. I have answered First Minister's questions since I took office in May about the challenge of the public finances. And Mr Sarwar has taken issue with the issues that I have brought forward in that respect. But when we look at the budget issues we are wrestling with now, particularly as we debated yesterday in Parliament, employers' national insurance contributions, what we find is that while the Labour government is offering increases in funding, which amount to 1% in our budget once inflation is taken into account, £400 million, on the other hand, we are facing increased employer national insurance contributions of £600 million. So what we have is a Labour government in London giving with the one hand and taking away with the other. That is austerity by the back door, and that's what Labour is delivering to Scotland.
Question number 3, Lorna Slater.
In Scotland, there are over 10,000 deaths a year as a direct result of alcohol, tobacco and obesity. Minimum unit pricing on alcohol in Scotland reduces the harms from cheap booze, but at present it is supermarkets and large retailers who profit from the increased price of alcohol, while our NHS is struggling. That's why, when the Scottish Greens were in government, we secured a commitment to reintroduce a levy on retailers profiting from the sale of alcohol and tobacco, which would help fund NHS services. Can the First Minister confirm whether his government still supports a public health levy, and will it be included in the draft budget when that is published in 2 weeks' time?
First Minister.
President Officer, these are issues that are very important. Lorna Slater raises an important question about the impact of tobacco and alcohol misuse and the impact that can have on the health of the population. The Government has, of course, taken significant action in relation to minimum unit pricing, and we will continue to focus on measures to tackle this significant factor. As to the question of a public health supplement, that will be considered as part of the budget process, and of course I'm not at liberty at this stage to conclude on those issues until the budget comes to Parliament in December.
Lorna Slater.
This week, an alliance of 24 Scottish health organisations have backed the Scottish Greens' calls for a public health levy in this year's budget, and polling shows a majority of the public support it too. The Fraser of Allender Institute estimate that it could raise as much as £57 million a year, money which could pay for smoking cessation programmes, breastfeeding support in communities, or increased screening programmes for cancer. Why does the First Minister equivocate on this matter? He has had a whole year to design and consult on this new public health levy. So why is it not ready to be introduced now? And how will the First Minister respond to organisations calling for its urgent rollout?
First Minister.
President, I would point out to Lorna Slater that the Government already has in place higher business taxes on larger retailers, which is a source of great controversy, but we have that in place already, which takes into account some of the issues that Lorna Slater is raising with me. But she also will have to accept that I cannot disclose today the contents of a government budget that hasn't yet been finalised, and that will be finalised a week on Wednesday and will be set out to Parliament, and then there will be opportunity for Parliament to debate these issues.
Question number 4, Michelle Thompson.
To ask the First Minister when the Scottish Government last met with Ineos or Petro-Ineos to discuss the refinery at Grangemouth.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government continues to engage regularly with key stakeholders following the announcement by Petro-Ineos that it intends to cease refining at Grangemouth. The Energy Cabinet Secretary last met with the business on the 5th of November, and Government officials met with staff from the business last week.
Michelle Thompson.
I thank the First Minister for that response. Unite the Union gave evidence to the Economy Committee yesterday. In their view, this is a profitable site and a distorted picture has been given from the accounts available. They believe that there can be no justification for a closure now and that money spent to support a biorefinery will be wasted if the underlying skills base is lost. The UK Government's inaction has much to answer for, but will the First Minister commit to working on a pause in the closure and not accept the loss of this national strategic asset without a clearer path to a just transition?
First Minister.
President Officer, I recently met with Derek Thompson of Unite to discuss the very issues that Michelle Thompson puts to me. And Michelle Thompson will be aware that the Scottish Government believes that the closure announcement for the refinery is a premature decision and that it accelerates a change that does not need to take place at this stage but could be managed over a number of further years to enable us to put more alternatives in place. Michelle Thompson specifically asked me if I would support a pause in any plans to close the refinery, and I do. And I've put that point to the Prime Minister with the willingness that the Scottish Government would work with the United Kingdom Government to try to find a way of working with the company to avoid a situation where we had a premature closure of the refinery. So that will be the position the Scottish Government takes forward as we continue to work with the UK Government and with the company to try to avoid economic disruption and damage to the Grangemouth area and especially to the livelihoods of the workers who are involved.
Brief supplementary, Stephen Kerr.
The refinery is scheduled to close in Q2. Skilled workers are already leaving the area. These are the very people needed for the transition. Willow doesn't report until later next year. If we can't have the full Willow sooner, can we see an interim Willow report much, much sooner? And which projects in the growth deal can be expedited to tackle the immediate threat to nearly 3,000 jobs?
Minister.
I don't think I could commit to an earlier publication of the Willow report because there is that is essentially why, in my answer to Michelle Thompson, I argue for us to have more time to get to a situation where we have other credible opportunities that can be pursued, and these take time to develop. So the important point from the Government's perspective is about having a delay to the closure of the refinery. That is the position of the Scottish Government. Now, as for other proposals that can be brought forward, obviously I've set out to Parliament the importance I see in the investment in the Acorn Carbon Capture and Storage project, which would provide significant opportunities to the Grangemouth site. I was very disappointed that we did not have any more progress on that issue in the United Kingdom budget in late October. I have made that point again to the Prime Minister because I believe the Acorn project would provide us with significant opportunity to take forward and address the significant point that Mr Kerr puts to me.
Schragan.
Presiding Officer, it's beginning to look like the First Minister has accepted defeat on Scotland ever becoming an independent country, as under his watch Scotland will become the only top 25 oil-producing nation with no refining capacity. How has it come to this, that a nationalist government looks away, helpless, as key national infrastructure is lost forever?
First Minister.
I don't think Ash Regan has listened to a word I've said in response to Michelle Thompson or to Stephen Kerr, because what I've said is that I am actively pursuing an option to maintain the refining capacity at Grangemouth. If that needs to be stated again, I will state it again to Parliament so that it's clearly understood, because I think economic damage will be done if there is not intervention to prolong the refinery life cycle at Grangemouth. And if we do that, we have the opportunity to secure carbon capture and storage. We have the opportunity to take forward the other projects through the Project Willow exercise, and that will provide us with a secure future for the Grangemouth site. So let there be no doubt about it. The Scottish Government is actively pursuing these opportunities to protect the workers at Grangemouth.
Question number 5, Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister, in light of reported figures that over 2,000 people were killed or seriously injured on Scotland's roads last year, what the Scottish Government's position is on whether 2024 could see the highest number of road accidents and fatalities on record.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I want to express my sympathies to everyone who has been affected by the loss of a loved one and to anyone who has been injured on our roads. Publication of finalised road casualty statistics for 2023 showed that the number killed on Scotland's roads fell to 155 in 2023. This was the fourth lowest annual figure and the second lowest recorded in a non-pandemic year. However, the Cabinet Secretary for Transport has previously highlighted the significant road challenges we face in 2024. Road safety remains a top priority for the Scottish Government. That is why we are investing £36 million in this financial year in a broad range of initiatives aimed at improving driver behaviour and reducing road casualties.
Jamie Green.
I agree that one death on our roads is one death too many. Too many families have lost loved ones on Scotland's roads, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to see that trajectory go down and not up this year or in future years. But here's the reality of Scotland's roads. There's a £2.5 billion backlog of road repairs, and that doesn't include what is necessary to upgrade or improve some of the accident hotspots like the A9, the A96 and the A77, bearing in mind that 65% of road deaths occur on rural roads. Action is needed, and it is needed fast, First Minister. So let me simply ask if the First Minister's government is still fully committed to fully dualling every single road that it promised the public that it would dual in its manifestos. And how many more lives, First Minister, will be needlessly lost whilst we wait for that to happen?
First Minister.
The Government remains committed to its investment programme, and we will take the action that I have set out in my earlier answer to support road safety measures. The Transport Secretary is actively involved in many of these questions, hosting a Road Safety Summit in February of this year to review all current road safety measures, and that will remain a very focused part of the agenda that the Transport Secretary and the Government takes forward.
Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, on Tuesday this week, yet another person lost his life in an incident on the A9, and 3 more people had to be taken to hospital. The Road Safety Foundation has produced evidence that people are 3 times more likely to lose their lives in an incident on a single-track, single-carriageway road than on a dual-carriageway road, and a staggering 10 times more likely to lose their life on a single-track road as opposed to a motorway. That means people in the Highlands, in the north of Scotland, families in the Highlands, are 10 times more likely to lose somebody to a road death than in the Central Belt. Therefore, can I ask the First Minister, will he bring forward proposals for the swifter dualling of the A9 so that fewer people die? And will he obtemper the promise made to the cross-party delegation of MSPs that I led and met him in June, when he said he would give serious consideration to that matter a full 5 months ago?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I recognise the seriousness and the significance of this issue. The incident to which Mr Ewing refers took place in my own parliamentary constituency, just to the south of Ballinluig. The Government has, of course, invested in a number of stretches of A9 dualling already, and when I was travelling on the A9 on Monday, I saw the beginnings of the work that is underway in the next stretch to be dualled, which is the Moy to Matin stretch of the road. As I indicated to Parliament in June, the Government will keep the programme under review to identify whether there is any way that we can move at a faster rate. Officials are in the process of considering the implications of resequencing or accelerating completion of the A9 dualling programme, and the Cabinet Secretary for Transport has asked that a report on the findings of this work be published when that is complete. And I take this opportunity to extend my sympathies to the family of the individual who lost their life on the A9 on Tuesday, and to all those who were affected by the incident.
Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week is UK Road Safety Week, that's organised by Briggs, and the Scottish Government Road Safety Framework did include a commitment to hold a Scottish Road Safety Week each year, the first taking place in March 2022, but there has not been another one. Has this commitment been dropped? And the Scottish Government also committed to raising a national conversation on road safety in 2022. When can we expect to see any progress on this, given that Transport Scotland say they received no resources to deliver either of these initiatives?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Government works closely with Brake to provide support to victims of road crashes. Officials last met with the organisation earlier this month on the 1st of November. In addition to that, the Government hosted a Road Safety Summit in February of 2024 to review all current road safety measures and to help to identify new strategies to support action towards our 2030 casualty reduction targets. And we will work constructively with different organisations that represent victims of road traffic incidents to ensure that they are well supported in addressing the points that Claire Baker puts to me.
Question number 6, Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reported calls to widen access to Scotland's redress scheme to allow survivors of abuse at Fernethy House to seek redress.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I am profoundly sorry to hear what the survivors of abuse at Fernethy House endured and the impact that abuse has had on their lives. And I want to again praise the courage of the survivors in sharing their experiences. Scotland's redress scheme was designed primarily for those vulnerable children who were in long-term care, often isolated with limited or no contact with their families. Children resident on a short-term basis were not in that position. The eligibility criteria for the redress scheme were extensively debated during the passage of the redress bill, and the eligibility criteria were included in the purpose of the scheme. This does not diminish the heartbreaking abuse that the Fernethy survivors faced. The Deputy First Minister met with the survivors to explain the decision to them directly and will continue to engage with them.
Colin Smith.
First Minister, words aren't enough. In January 2023, you told the Education Committee it would be, and I quote, possible for Fernethy survivors to be successful in applying under the scheme. Now your government are saying they won't be successful because it was so-called short-term care under arrangements involving parents. But isn't the reality that the length of time of any abuse is irrelevant? Abuse is abuse. And these wee girls were sent to Fernethy as a result of clear direction from the state, cut off from their parents and subjected to unimaginable physical, mental and in some cases sexual abuse by staff employed by the state. But the state has utterly failed to take responsibility. So, First Minister, will your government now take responsibility? Will it do the right thing and widen access to the redress scheme for these brave survivors?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I recognise the significance of and the seriousness of this issue, and indeed as the person who took the redress bill through Parliament, I did all that I could within the parliamentary passage of the bill to ensure that the scheme we brought forward was as extensive and as comprehensive as it could be. Now, the comments to which Mr Smith referred were made by me during an evidence session with the Education Committee at a time when public authorities were still researching the basis upon which and the circumstances in which children were placed in Fernethy House, which would have a bearing on eligibility for the redress scheme that Parliament approved. Now, the independent research that was undertaken as part of the commitments given to the Fernethy survivors reported that, in such records as those that exist, indicate that children were primarily placed in Fernethy for short-term care with the agreement of their parents, which is fundamentally different to the scheme that the Parliament legislated for. Fernethy House will be a case study in the next phase of the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, and there will be an opportunity for further exploration of the issues and the circumstances involved in these cases.
Thank you. We move to general and constituency supplementaries, and I call Claire Haughey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. With energy prices set to rise again in January, households across Scotland will be facing significant pressures when it comes to heating their homes this winter. During the election campaign, Labour promised to cut fuel bills by £300. However, instead, bills have gone up. And while this government is delivering the low-income winter heating payment and other initiatives to support those most in need, the UK Labour government is callously cutting the winter fuel payment to pensioners. Will the First Minister join me in calling on the UK Government to make good on their manifesto commitment to tackle rising fuel bills and reverse their winter fuel cut?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I think members of the public will be stunned that a Labour government that promised to reduce fuel bills by on average £300 has actually seen those bills increase in October, with the likelihood of further increases coming in January again. To compound that difficult situation, the withdrawal of the winter heating payment means that over 400,000 eligible people on low incomes will lose entitlement as a consequence. So this is a very serious situation that faces particularly pensioners in our society today, and I make the plea today that I think is absolutely central to what we need to do to get the UK Government to reverse an unwarranted cut in winter fuel payments, which is damaging the livelihoods and the circumstances of pensioners in Scotland.
Gossel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Shocking figures released this week on domestic abuse indicated that cases reported to Police Scotland had risen by 3%. This equals to almost 64,000 cases. That is one incident every 10 minutes. Behind every number there is a terrible real-life story. Next week marks the beginning of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. However, these latest horrific statistics show that we are moving backwards, not forwards. Therefore, I would like to ask the First Minister, when will his government stand with survivors and take concrete action to eliminate domestic abuse by supporting my Prevention of Domestic Abuse Scotland Bill, which will protect victims of domestic abuse and has been backed by organisations and survivors?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, on Pam Gossel's bill, the Government is engaging with Pam Gossel on this question, and the Cabinet Secretary for Justice had a productive meeting with Pam Gossel on the 25th of September, and we will of course consider full details when we have further detail on the component parts of the bill. In relation to her comments on the Government's approach to domestic abuse, I would remind Parliament that the Government introduced and Parliament supported the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act 2018, which was introduced in the subsequent year, and that strengthened the legal protection for victims of domestic abuse and significantly increased the constraints on any perpetrators of domestic abuse. Now, the figures that Pam Gossel referred to are unacceptable, but they are an indication that more individuals are coming forward to raise to report offences and to make sure the perpetrators of domestic violence are brought to account. Fundamentally, what has got to change here is the behaviour of men. Men's behaviour has got to change. The Government will put in place the legislative framework to enable that to be the case. But fundamentally, the behaviour of men has got to change and domestic violence has got to come to an end, and it will only happen when the behaviour of men changes.
Colleen McNeill.
The Herald have been running an excellent series this week highlighting the crisis in legal aid, but it's not only criminal legal aid where lawyers are abandoning their profession, but civil legal aid. 4 out of 5 lawyers working in civil legal aid in Glasgow will no longer take on protective order cases for victims of domestic abuse, Because in 1999, lawyers accepted the principle of one fee of £500 for work in a single case, and 25 years later, that fee is only £572 and more work is required. And that has resulted in many young lawyers entering the legal profession with better options, including Crown Office. So does the First Minister accept that it is a crisis and that it would be reprehensible if domestic abuse victims cannot access a lawyer? Does the First Minister agree that the way forward is for Scotland to invest in the whole legal aid system, the whole justice system, by an annual uprating of fees, but invigorating the trainee scheme to encourage young lawyers to choose this branch of the legal profession to demonstrate that there is a future for legal aid in Scotland?
First Minister.
I think it's absolutely essential that young lawyers emerging into the legal profession are entering a whole variety of different elements of the legal profession. So the points that are made by Polly McNeill in that respect are absolutely valid. There is, of course, evidence from the Scottish Legal Aid Board that shows that cases involving allegations of domestic abuse are coming through the judicial system, and that is welcome, because it's important that those that are reporting potential crimes are able to see those crimes pursued as part of the judicial system. The Government will engage actively on the questions in relation to the future of legal aid. We recognise that reform is needed in the legal aid system, which is why our vision, our document, Our Vision for Justice in Scotland, contains an action plan to reform the legal aid system, and we will take forward the actions that are set out in that document.
Colin Beattie.
It is now over 1,000 days since Putin launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine. 1,000 days of courageous resistance and sacrifice by the Ukrainian people. How has the Scottish Government supported Ukrainians, and what assurance can the First Minister give that Scotland will continue to stand in solidarity with Ukraine for as long as it takes?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, can I thank Colin Beattie for raising this issue and for reminding Parliament that we are now over 1,000 days since the illegal invasion of Ukraine. There is absolutely no justification for the illegal invasion of Ukraine, and the Russian aggression has to be repelled. Scotland has stood in solidarity with Ukraine. We have provided sanctuary for over 28,000 people sponsored by the Scottish Government or an individual in Scotland to come to this country. Over 21,000 of these arrivals are part of the Government's support scheme. We've invested heavily in providing the support that's available to Ukrainian refugees to come here, and I want to make it clear that those Ukrainian refugees are welcome in Scotland and play an important part in our country. And at this moment, I reiterate the unacceptability of the illegal invasion of Ukraine, the determination to stand in solidarity with the Ukrainian population, and the necessity for the Russian aggression to be repelled. That is a necessity in our modern world today.
Liam Kerr.
I'm very grateful, Presiding Officer. Due to factors including a sustained decline in public funding, Robert Gordon University may make up to 135 redundancies. Dundee University, with a £30 million deficit, said redundancies are inevitable. Edinburgh University warns of job cuts in response to unsustainable funding. Anton Muscatelli, the outgoing principal of Glasgow University, asked, why should our government not properly fund higher education for our own students? Will the First Minister answer him by agreeing to an open-minded, cross-party, multi-stakeholder collaboration on university resourcing, or does he prefer ideological purity and redundancies?
First Minister.
Well, I prefer to invest in the university system, which the Government does, with £1 billion worth of public expenditure. And
let's hear the First Minister.
And a commitment to work collaboratively with the university sector to make sure that the research excellence of Scotland is able to be deployed as part of the overall economic approach in Scotland, where innovation and creativity lie at the heart of taking forward some of the fantastic elements of research that come from our university community. Now, what's not helping our universities just now is the fact that they're facing a significant increase in employer national insurance contributions. That's the point that's been made by the principal of the University of Edinburgh. The shock to their finances by the unilateral action of the United Kingdom Government in increasing employer national insurance contributions. It's another argument for why that particular policy approach by the UK Government needs to be reversed.
Daniel Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister may have seen reports that airport travel company Cavu, who have taken over a passenger lounge at Edinburgh Airport, intend to make 16 people redundant by exploiting a loophole in the law rather than undertaking the usual TUPE transfers one might expect. So does the First Minister agree with me that this is not only morally reprehensible, but that in a time of tight labour markets, this sort of fire and rehire practice is entirely counterproductive for anyone seeking to be a responsible employer? And secondly, I've already written to the Chief Executive of Cavu asking him to reconsider not to put people out of work just weeks before Christmas. Will he do likewise?
First Minister.
Well, obviously, in any circumstances of this nature, the Government's commitment is to the Fair Work principles. They will be applied. They should be applied in all circumstances by any employer in Scotland, and I would encourage the employers involved in the case that Mr Johnson puts to me to do exactly that.
Kenny Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week, the Post Office announced the closure of all 115 Crown Post Office branches owned directly by the UK Labour Government, with a loss of up to 1,000 jobs. One of the 10 Scottish branches slated for closure is in Saltcoats in my constituency. Post offices provide a range of vital services, particularly for older people less comfortable with technology. The loss of services and jobs will be felt keenly. Can the First Minister outline what representations the Scottish Government is making to UK ministers to save these important community resources?
First Minister.
I understand the point that Mr Gibson puts to me, and access to post office services is crucial in communities to ensure there is an effective network to be available. We will certainly make sure that the representations that Mr Gibson has made to me today are taken up with the United Kingdom Government to ensure that there is a viable and effective network of access to postal services in Scotland that meets the needs of all constituents, and particularly the constituents raised by Mr Gibson.
Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of a recently published report entitled Valuing Carers. It highlights that after collating data from the 2022 census, the value of unpaid carers to Scotland is £15.9 billion, which was not far short of the 2022 total NHS budget. So will the First Minister join me in recognising the contribution of unpaid carers, and what more can the Scottish Government do to ensure they are properly supported?
First Minister.
I'm very happy to associate myself with the comments made by Mr Whittle. I met with a group of carers representatives in my own constituency last Friday morning as part of the lead-up to Carers Week, and I listened with care to the issues that they raised with me. The Government is, of course, has put in place measures to support short-term breaks, for example, for carers, to enhance carers allowance, and we'll obviously reflect on these issues as we consider the contents of the Government's budget. But I agree wholeheartedly with Mr Whittle that the contribution made by carers is absolutely fundamental to the delivery of care support within households and communities around the country, and we simply couldn't provide the level of care that's provided by unpaid carers to support their loved ones and to support our society in these days.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. Point of order, Pam Gossel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the 19th of November, the national newspaper printed an article criticising my decision to raise concerns over LGBT Youth Scotland, an organisation geared towards those between 13 and 25 and not children of primary school age, working with 2 primary schools in my area of Milngavie on a pilot programme. I raised these concerns in a letter to the Council's Chief Exec after being contacted
Ms Gossel, if I might just... a point of order should be raised where a member has concerns that proper procedures are or have been followed in this item of business.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that, presiding officer. There is. Yeah, sorry about that.
Please do.
So, yes. Maggie Chapman, MSP, made a comment stating that I am categorically more of a risk to children than the LGBT Youth Scotland's project in primary schools. I view this as clear defamation of my character. Therefore, I would hope the member would apologise and retract these comments. Can I ask you, presiding officer, whether you were aware of these comments by Maggie Chapman MSP, and if not, now that you have heard them, whether you believe they conform to the Code of Conduct Section 7, paragraph 5 and 6 on the treatment of others?
Ms Gossel, you will be very well aware, I'm sure the member is aware, that I wish all members of Parliament to treat one another with courtesy and respect at all times. Points of order in relation to articles that have appeared in the newspaper are not subjects that I would necessarily expect to be raised in an item of business as a point of order. First Minister's question is concluded. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Ros McCall. There will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and the public gallery to do so before the next item of business.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.